I'm Erica.
And I'm CJ.
And you're listening to the Her Podcast. All right, friends, we have a special episode today. We are actually bringing back one of our OG guests from episode 13, Maddy Redekopp. But this time she is joined by her very sweet, very fun husband, Tanner Redekopp, to talk all about their foster care update. Last time she was on, we heard a little bit about her journey, how she got to wanting to be a foster parent. And this time we thought we'd bring on Tanner to hear his side while also hearing how they've been navigating all the different changes in their lives, which include multiple new children in and out of their home. We're really excited to sit down with them. They have such amazing hearts. We know you guys are going to learn so many amazing things about foster care, and we just encourage you to turn it up and take a listen.
I'm very eager to hear Tanner talk and to say something inappropriate that Erica then has to edit out.
Oh, yeah.
I'm the one who says the most inappropriate things, and I rarely edit them out because I think it's hilarious.
Sounds good.
I'm so excited to sit down with you guys. How was your morning today?
I want you guys to share the morning.
Normal?
Maddie, what happened this morning?
Normal morning.
No, Maddie, where were you? Where were you this morning when Tanner
I
gave
was
you
at
some news?
home, and I thought to myself, Tanner's home all morning for the most part. I'm going to have a shower and blow dry my hair, which I don't wash my hair all the time. So I like to take my time when I do those things. And I'm in the middle of it. And then Tanner pokes his head inside, and because he had picked up our daughter's friend, drops him off and says, yeah, I have a hitchhiker in the truck, so I'm just going to go drive him to Saskatoon and back. And you know, we're trying to get ready to go to the podcast here, and we only have like an hour and a bit before we're supposed to be here. So that was a real wrench in my morning because my hair was already wet, half blue dried. Blue dried.
But I just think like this is not a surprise.
This happens all the time.
It doesn't happen all the time. I don't always pick up hitchhikers, only every once in a while.
I'm going to address
the guy needed a ride. What are you supposed to do? Just drive by? And then at that point, I was halfway to Saskatoon, so I may as well just take him all the way. He stayed awake all night. He's come from Buffalo Narrows, landed in Blaine Lake, stayed awake all night outside, and then carried on walking in the morning.
I wasn't going to tell you to leave him on our yard, but it was unexpected.
Yeah.
But we made it. Both of us. My hair's dry.
But I think we can just wrap up the podcast there because that just shares exactly what I want you guys to know about Maddy and Tanner, that these are the kind of people there. They pick up hitchhikers, and even knowing that they might be late for something, you know, they understand the need.
I knew I was going to be on time, okay?
We rolled up like 1 minute ago.
Okay, well, I think that we need like a little bit of an update to begin with. Yeah. I think we have, Tanner, we really want to hear from you as well.
How much time do we have here?
I'm not telling you. You're just like locked here until we say leave.
Well, I just want to make sure we don't like say too much stuff.
Oh, yeah. We'll keep you on track.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Maddie's episode is one of my favorites, and it's one of the ones I always recommend to everybody. So we're both just like pumped that you get to be here today too. Maddie, we love that you're here too. But Tan, man, I was really excited for this, for the world to meet Tanner.
Yeah, I was excited from 8 hours ago hearing that we were doing this.
This is the other thing. Maddy and Tanner are near and dear to Nick and I, and to CJ, of course. But actually, why don't I give a slight update, which is why you're actually here again.
I was going to say.
So we had Maddy on. Yeah, she was episode 13. So like way OG.
In the beginning.
I was part of the trial.
Yes, she was. We were like, can we make this work?
Part of the trial.
Part of the beta
I was
test.
a test run.
Yeah, really. I did it.
I was in the pilot.
Test subject. No, so this is what we did. Okay, so we like had Maddy on. And I knew Maddy a bit from living in Waltheim, but not like just a ton. And we have a tiny bit of history with Tanner, working with Nick a little bit, but again, just not too much. But when I was editing the episode for Maddy, I heard a voice, I believe voice of God, who was like, you should love on Maddy and Tanner. And I was like, okay, sounds good. So I invited Maddy for coffee.
That was a mistake. Right?
They got me good.
They roped her in.
Tanner's like, it was actually my voice. No, but basically I was like, we should be friends with, because I listened to the story and it was very impactful. So we started to get to know Maddy and Tanner, and within a few short months, I feel like I now consider you guys family. So we're like, Tanner's like,
hey, I didn't say
He's
that.
like, no. He's like, shaking his head.
he's like, we're not family.
No, he's not. No, he's not.
But I do, so too bad. And so we kind of have gotten to know them on a whole other level, even since the podcast, which is why when we had an opening today last minute, it was like a no-brainer to be like, we got to bring both Maddy and Tanner back because we just think you guys are amazing and we just want to hear updates from you.
Well, because basically, like, how many kiddos did we have when you were on last? Which, like, we might not be able to
No,
remember.
you're right.
You know,
we were talking about how it was significant that we went from 2 to 5 in 1 year. Which is so funny because we went from 5 to 10 in like 6 months.
No, not 10.
We had 10.
9.
I'm just saying we had 10 at one point. Lots has happened. Yeah, we had 5 kids.
Okay, well, how did we go from 5 to 9, maybe 10?
We were still building our house last time. And so then we had rushed to move into our house because there was one of our, there was a family member of some of the kids that we were caring for that had been in a group home, and her parents had given us permission to pursue her to come and live in our home. And so we kind of got the house, but like we were living in a rental and we had no space that the ministry would approve moving any more kids into our house. So we rushed into our house so that we had bedroom capacity, and then started like, okay, we're ready, like let's move her, and kept hitting a lot of obstacles. But with our pursuit of her, she had a few medical needs, the ministry is like, oh, you still want to take medical kids? So then they had presented a different child with extensive medical needs, and we obviously were like, yeah, we'll definitely do that. It's very much on my heart to look after the kids with medical needs, just because it's part of my history. That's a very easy yes for me, and it's a very hard yes for so many others. So we had said yes as long as it didn't impact our pursuit of our kids' cousin. And so then that happened, and so then we had him, and that's a long story. But then after that, we started emergency placements, which was an influx of kids for long and short periods of time.
So what's an emergency placement look like?
Totally. So Tanner and I have always been long-term placement home, which is just, titles for kids after they've been in the system for so long. They get a long-term order and title, but that's usually at like the 18-month mark. So before that, they are considered short-term or emergent placements. And that just is based on timeline, essentially, and based on maybe what their parents are needing at the time or what state their parents are in. And so typically emergency placements are for kids that were immediately removed that day, that they just need a plan right now, and we'll look at long-term planning tomorrow. We need a bed now, would be like kind of the way to put it. And so typically it's like kids that are immediately removed. Sometimes it's kids that are actually being removed from other foster homes where a foster parent is saying, this child has to go today, you need to come and pick him up. And so some of our emergency placements were that, where they had come from a different foster home, where some had come right from their, birth mom's home or wherever they had been staying with their birth family.
Which brings a whole different level of like chaos.
Oh yeah.
Right.
It was 100% Tanner's idea. I really like the comfort of long-term placements.
Okay, so then why did you feel, let's get into Tanner a little bit, because I do think, like, I've had the opportunity to hear a bit of Tanner's journey with foster care and his heart behind it, but what led you to be like, we should do emergency placement?
We had started attending this like foster parent coffee every Friday, and then through that we started to hear stories. There were some workers who worked in various group homes or like were tied to the ministry in some way or knew somebody, and then every Friday we'd go and I'd hear like a story of, there was 10 kids in the office last night. There was like 5 kids today. Like, it was always an outrageous thing, and that there was no homes. Everybody's maxed out, and they will literally, kids, I mean, they'll stay in the office. Like they will sit there, a worker will sit there and they'll start calling, and they'll call and call and call, trying to find a place to put a child. And if they cannot find that place, like that child will stay there for night.
Or like a hotel suite, or
I mean, that does happen sometimes. They try not to do that, but yeah. So anyways, so we had heard like many stories. And so then one morning I went to this coffee by myself, and I called Maddie after and I said, okay, let's put our name on the list. Like, what are we doing here? There's an influx of kids right now and we got beds. So it's only logical that we open up to this. So we said, yeah, let's do it. And we had known a family who had been kind of doing this as well, and they were taking on infants. And so I think like naively, maybe we thought like that emergency placement would be an infant, in which it was not. Mm-hmm. And then, yeah, that started, and that lasted for like, well, how many months did that last?
That we did that.
Yeah. Like we are no longer on the emergency list, not because we chose to be, but because they removed us. Because the emergency,
tell me more.
The placements that they put with us, one of them stayed.
She's still here. She was our first emergency placement.
Yeah, and then we have.
And she's the best.
And then we took in how many emergency placements did we do?
We got our first one, and then 2 weeks later we got 3 kiddos for several days, and then the very next weekend we got 2 kiddos that stayed for 2 months. And then we got, very shortly after that, another boy, and he stayed for almost 2 months. And then they told us we had to stop. And then we got that little cousin that we had been waiting for in the mix of our emergency placements. And so our house just filled up rapidly, both with some that stayed and some that came and went. And then we got another little babe privately outside of the ministry, and then that really threw a wrench in.
Yeah.
So I mean, when Maddie was first here, they had 4 foster children and 1 biological child, but all 5 of their children. I want to be very clear on that aspect. And now you're sitting at 8 and 1 on the way.
Yeah.
Right. So it'll be 9.
If you're watching YouTube,
You see her cute little belly there.
Yes.
Right, another sweet babe on the way. So things obviously, I mean, yeah, it is funny to think about when we were sitting there and we're like, whoa, you have 5 kids. And now I think even it's interesting because I just saw a photo of a foster parent and I noticed they had like 9 kids. And I was like, I think it's just a part of like for some people their foster journey, which is really like you guys have just like been like, how many can we take? Because there's such a need. Not how many can we take because we're like, we want all the kids, but it's like, like you said.
Well, how do you say no?
How do you say no? Right?
When you know that there's not others saying yes. Like when I know that my no doesn't mean that's okay, another family is going to take this child. My no may mean this child may bump from hotel room to hotel room to emergency placement to emergency placement to emergency placement to a group home that's over capacity to another group home that just got an opening. Like that is significant.
Can you share what's the difference between like a group home and like a foster home?
Yeah, so
like,
people
you know what I mean?
will say that like, and they'll call us a group home, basically because of how many kids we have. And
which I wouldn't know the difference.
Funny. No,
I would really push back on that. I actually get that like really pisses me off when they say
that.
Yeah, you can.
because the difference between a group home and our home, we are a parent-headed household, right? So every morning the kids wake up, they see us together. They have us consistently in their lives. They have consistent grandmothers, uncles, aunts, grandparents. When they come into our home, they are a part of a family. Mm-hmm. Group home, it is just not like that. The only thing we share in common is that we both have large numbers of children in our house. A group home, although they might have, a rotation of familiar faces, you're not waking up to the same face every morning. You're not getting...
Is it actually a home then where people rotate in and out as workers?
Yes.
Oh,
like a physical house, like a house.
I understand.
Yeah.
It's not like someone's like, I'm going to make my home a group home.
No,
it's like a facility.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It's considered facility care. And these staff, and in no way do we minimize their love for these kids because it takes a specific person to want to work in that environment. But it's out of their control to consistently discipline the kids the same way, to consistently love them the same way. Even just, it's a challenge to communicate over your 8, 10, 12-hour shift. This is everything that happened. This is kind of what I laid out. Now, hopefully you go ahead and lay out the same things as you go into nighttime or whatever. And so we feel like it's 100% different. And although the kids their basic needs are being met, there's an emotional attachment and a security that just can't be met when it's not from a consistent mother and father figure.
And like the family like sphere that we have as well, like the grandparents, uncles and aunts and all of that, and like, you know, family gatherings, all those things, like they do not experience that in the same way that they will when they're in our home.
And sometimes to a detriment, where some kids have family connections and some don't. And you watch, you know, two of the kids.
Maddy has worked like in a group home before, so she does have,
so
like,
she like knows
a bit of insight into this.
I did. I have worked in a group home before, so I'm trying not to make assumptions based on other things outside of my experience. But it's harmful when there are favorites to workers, or it's harmful when kids get to see their bio mom or dad or go to these extended family visits or gatherings and others get left at home, where even being in a foster home, that still happens with some of our kids based on different family relationships. But we have a lot more power and control and flexibility to say, hey, if we're going to the park for this family visit, you know, Mom, is that okay if I bring my other kids and we can all play together? You know, and it's not something where some are being left out or some are being excluded, but we're continuing that family dynamic, including even the other side and the birth family that might be involved in the child's care and stuff, which has been like actually so like special and impactful for our kids, you know, coming from all different relationships. So that's been really special. And I don't think that you get that as well in facility care.
Yeah, and it should be stated that group home care it was never designed to be a long-term solution. So like we talked to a lady when we were at a course the other day, and they told us that their like the ideal situation for them is that a child stays in their home no longer than 30 days, and that the shortest kid who had stayed, the shortest placement they had recently, where the child just left, was like almost 2 years, I think.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
And so
That's
that just
not
shows
okay.
you, right? Like that just shows like
The disconnect.
So the problem is that there is a shortage of foster
Big time.
family.
there's a shortage of either foster families or kinship families, like, you know, grandparents who aren't able to care, or uncles and aunts, whatever that may be. So there's just a shortage. There's too many kids for what's going on.
Hey everybody, it's Erica. You guys know I love a quality handbag, and I recently found a luxury resale company that I have to share with you. Working Girls Boutique offers a stunning selection of gently loved luxury handbags and a safe, reliable, and secure way to purchase your dream bag. They have a strong commitment to authenticity and choose carefully curated pieces in excellent condition, which include Prada, YSL, Louis Vuitton, and they have a stunning Chanel collection, which is 100% on my dream list. One thing I love about Working Girls Boutique is how seriously they take making sure each piece is authentic. Ensuring authenticity of luxury items is a serious business, and Working Girls Boutique prides themselves on thoroughly checking every item they choose to the highest degree. They even use AI technology so you can feel super secure about the bags you are investing in. Working Girls Boutique also offers a flexible payment plan so you can secure your dream bag without breaking the bank. Plus, you know, they gave us an exclusive discount code for the Her community, which is amazing. It's code HER50 to save $50 off your purchase. If you're like me and constantly looking for that next dream bag to add to your closet, you can find all the details on the newest designer additions on their Instagram at Working Girls Boutique, and head to their website, wgboutique.com, to secure your dream bag. Don't forget to use the code HER50 for $50 off your purchase, and 100% make sure to tag me because I want to see what bag you snagged. So then, while we're still on this topic, because I do want to make sure that we hear a bit about you and like how you came from being the guy to call and be like, we're doing emergency placement. And like I said, I've had the opportunity to get to know Tanner over the last year-ish. And this guy, like, there's no short of like going to the ends of the earth for people. I really feel, both of you, but I've really like heard that from Tanner. So I want to hear more about that. But can you just quickly share, because as some of you know who follow me, we have a foster child now, a private care, who was actually one of their emergency placements, and he is now with us. You can see that on my page. But Mike and I, whenever I share this kind of stuff, I'm like, there's these statistics, and they're bad. But I'm like, I don't remember what they are. So I'm wondering if you can shed a light a little bit. I remember you shared with me about the success rates, I think, of children.
This is difficult to track because Canada does not a good job at actually mapping this out. And then so a lot of these statistics are also pulled out of the States because they do a way better job. And they deal with like a lot more children and a lot more homes. So, but like kind of a general idea and rule of thumb is that for boys, if you are in like institutional care, group home, and you are moved 4 times or more, which is pretty, like, that's pretty common. My friend would actually say he's never met a boy who's lived in group homes who hasn't moved more than 4 times. And they have over a 90% incarceration rate. So when and people will argue that this is not, that you're pulling children from a certain demographic or whatever. And that is like part of the reason why these stats are so slanted, but there definitely is like a heavy influence of what type of care there is. There is no proper stats on success rates of children growing up in foster homes, like long term. So I can't speak to that. But then also within the system, when you get to adulthood and you start dealing with addictions,
homeless population, incarceration rates, suicides, mental
prostitution, human trafficking, those numbers are like, it's something outrageous, like over 70% of that kind of whole group of issues is based off children who were in the system at some point. So again, whether that is, is it a product of the system, or is it because you're pulling from a certain demographic that was already struggling before they entered the system? It's hard to necessarily say, but the reality is that like they had a large shaping of their life was in the system at some point.
The fact that 70% of children that age out or spent time in the system end up in prostitution, on the streets, part of the mental health crisis, in jail, or dead. And that's statistic.
Or trafficked.
Or trafficked.
And when you say in the system, that includes group homes, foster care homes, like the entire thing.
It's including anything.
Any history of being apprehended and having to be under the government's reign, which is like, that's staggering. Even for the boys, like one of our kiddos, when we got him at 8 years old, we were his 15th placement.
Yeah.
Whoa.
And he'd been in the system since a baby. So statistically things are not
for
looking
him.
good.
Yeah.
Except he's an incredible young man.
He's completely, like, he's a different human than
100%.
But that is just like the reality of.
And so when people are so passionate about dealing with the impoverished as adults, or dealing with the mental health crisis, or dealing with the addiction crisis, or dealing with sex trafficking, or the high incarceration rates, for us, from our perspective, it's just a no-brainer that if you want to deal with that, you need to deal with this.
Yeah.
Like the root cause.
You need to deal with the kids that are in care, that are becoming those adults that don't have the tools and resources to successfully flourish.
Tools, resources, and just like human love and relationship. Like that's.
Well, and it's almost like the difference of, I heard it in a book. I don't know. It's probably about business, honestly, but it was like the difference between like trying to catch up.
Yeah.
And then, or like being ahead of it.
Yeah.
And again, I don't think we're promoting like, oh, don't worry about the homeless or all these people. And now let's just focus on foster care, because we need everyone to care about all of these individuals. But if we can go, okay, this is the outcome. We can see the trajectory of where these children are going. So instead of looking over here and seeing this crisis and being like, what is this crisis? It's like, let's go to the root of it.
Yeah.
And start working there.
Totally.
Is it going to wipe out all those numbers? I mean, Lord willing, right? Like that'd be great. But we can't, but it is about even hearing the rates like, well, even if they're in my home, they could end up like that. It's like, but at least we can like try.
Yeah.
It's about trying.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guarantee you, like, if you have a child in your home for like, whatever, or however many children, you are going to impact that child in like a dramatic way versus if you just like, not my problem, or like, they could end up that way anyways. Like, sure, but that's a terrible way to live life. Just
Well, I think even though we don't have the statistics with Canada, I think it's probably then important that people like you get behind the mic and say, I know all of your kids haven't like graduated and like hit that adult mark, yet, but I'm like to talk about how well over time they are doing, right? And talk about the success that we're seeing, because that is a positive stat going in that direction, right? And so getting out stories like this of hearing, how you bring in kids with all of this trauma, right? And seeing them walk through that journey.
Yeah. Which we don't believe they could do without. That's where it again comes back to family care. Like, I don't think that our older kids that we've seen such like miraculous change in would have, and not to a credit to ourselves, but just to the environment that they have been loved in consistently. And that is a game changer. And I don't think that you would receive that in facility care.
And we should also state that the ideal way that this would work out is when a child is apprehended, that kinship care happens first. And so that's a family member of sorts, whether that's a grandma.
Yes.
And so for our kids, for our first set of kids, that was not an option, and they ended up in group care. And so like, I just want to be clear, like that's like the overall like
we do
hierarchy of what work, like even like that's
always
what's
trying to place
best.
with their own family
reunification, right?
Yeah.
Reunification,
and that can look in so many different ways. But
Yeah.
being in your home community, being with your birth family, even extended family, but then that's where again relationship is so key, because these kinship families are struggling.
Well, and these kinship families will often have like
So many other
8-9 kids themselves, and they have like a far more difficult struggle with life than like my friend. Again, he knows a grandmother who has, I believe it's 12 kids in care, and she's not living in like a 4,000 square foot house in a nice beautiful area, right? Like she's in it, and she's caring for 12 grandkids.
Wow.
And so like, I think what we do, we're like very blessed and set up to make life as easy as possible, but there are people and there's kinship families out there who are just like going through it every day in very, very difficult circumstances.
And like as cookums and mushums,
Yeah.
they've already lived a hard, long life, and now just doing all that they can to keep their family together and keep their grandkids and great grandkids together and safe is a huge task. And then to think of doing that without friendship and support that all of us, we could list tons of people.
Like when we think about it, like if we didn't have like the people around us to support us and care for us and help in like whatever way, a lot of like, again, this is speaking from our experience with a handful of specific grandmothers, they don't have that same support network. And so like I just can't imagine how difficult it is for them to go day by day. And they're not just dealing with their kids, they're dealing with their
adult kids.
They're not just dealing with their grandkids, they're dealing with their adult kids. They're dealing with like so much heartbreak and tragedy, like basically every week.
That's a lot. I'm curious then, you spoke sort of to like the American system being a little bit more set up than possibly the Canadian system, but I'm curious to hear from your guys' perspective, because you're so involved and immersed in it. Like, what are some of the pieces? I don't know if we can like hit on this, but like, what are some of the things that are really needed and you would like to shed light on that would be helpful? Oh, that's a big one. Okay.
Okay, this is
sure, go.
No, I was going to say, we talked a little bit about misconceptions people have about foster care, and I don't know if this will directly answer that question, but one of the big ones that we find all the time is that people outside of foster care think that the government of Canada has it all together, has all the answers, has all the resources, that this actually isn't a problem because there's so many systems put in place for these children. And what we've experienced...
For the children and for the parents.
Yeah.
Right.
And we're constantly trying to get people on board to be involved and invested in foster care and the many different streams of it, because what we've experienced is that that's just not the case, that these resources and systems put in place by the government are just not sufficient enough. And quite frankly, just as we are short on foster homes, social services is short on staff, and they can't keep up. They don't have the resources themselves in terms of manpower to actually implement and do what's necessary for these kids and their families. And so then children and parents are falling through the cracks all the time, or are, ending up back into these cycles because we missed them or we couldn't provide what they needed the moment that they needed it. And not that it all can be instantaneous, but that is a huge misconception that I feel like general society can just step back and be like, well, we don't have to be involved because there's already stuff set in place for them. And we have just come across that to be not true over and over and over again.
I think even in our experience, is very, very little. I've been surprised, and I will speak to on my own end, having a good relationship with, who we've worked with so far. However, I'm surprised at how often I ask a question and it's almost met with like, I can't tell you that, like, we don't know. Mm-hmm. We don't know. Or, I'm like, well, what if this scenario happens? Or if that, like, what, because I'm a first time doing this, and I'm like, I'm in the water here. So can you give me, and I will, like, I'm not trying to like speak negatively about anyone in particular, but I've just been surprised at what feels like a lack of even information, and I'm in it. Mm-hmm. So I can only imagine people who are like not in it. Yeah. They're just like, oh, it's fine because we're not hearing anything about it. But totally. It's like, it's because no one knows what to say, maybe. I don't know. So I've been really surprised by that myself.
Yeah.
Oh, Tanner, where's your brain going?
I don't know.
Thoughts?
I don't. Like one really basic thing that I think could be implemented by like a lot of people and should be done better is that there are many different careers that will interact with a foster child at some point. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that we have there could be better training on trauma, on behaviors associated to trauma, on dealing with specific things. Like across the board.
Mm-hmm. It's not their fault either. It's just, again, points to there's a problem and a lacking here.
Sorry, I want to pivot now because I do want to hear a little bit from Tanner here. Because when we heard from Maddy, what she told us was, I always wanted to be a foster mom. And like I told Tanner on our second date.
Yep. That happened.
I also heard a lot about your dates. I asked Maddy the other day.
Because they were so well planned.
About how that all went. But I'm interested, you can be as open as you want and share as much detail as you want about you meeting this beautiful woman. And she's like, I want to foster care. And you were like, sure. And like, what, like, just explain for us.
Yeah. So that happened. She said like second date, this is the deal. And I just gave like a yes, no problem. And looking back on it, I think I've said this like many times. I think I just like straight up lied. Like I was kind of the mindset that, once there's a ring on it, she can't go anywhere. And then I can like, unconvince her. So then we were married for about 6 months. When I was at work and she sent me a link to like the foster care application process. And I was like, yeah, that's not happening. Way too soon, too busy, whatever, 100 reasons. And there was some tension there. And then a couple months after, she comes to me and says that she knows these 2 children. They've been apprehended. What do I think? And I was like, starting a business. She's working night shifts. I had this whole list of things. Like, it didn't work. It didn't make sense. Completely broke. House was literally ripped apart, like completely demoed. Not kid friendly. And yeah, so anyways. And so that's kind of where I thought the conversation ended. And then she carried on trying to figure out exactly where the kids ended up, because we knew that they left, but she didn't know where they ended up. And she eventually found a worker who would talk to her, found out which group home they were in. And she comes to me and she's like, okay, I've actually found them. This is the deal. This is the situation. And again, I was like, this isn't going to work, whatever. And then she says, fine, I guess we'll just call it off then. I'll call the worker and I'll tell her we're done. And then I was like, well, you can't do that. Like, now I'm catch-22, so I'm in it. And so I agreed. I said, Kate, yeah, I agreed. And so we got the kids, and that was like, first of all, lots of pushback from everybody around us. Mm-hmm. You're not married long enough. So when we received our first 2 kids, we were not even married a year. So they said, you're not married long enough. Some people said you should probably have your own kids first. Some people said, now that you're taking in children, you shouldn't have kids at all, because that mix will be a disaster. How are you going to do this? You don't have time. You don't have money. Your house is like, everybody hit me with all the reasons. And I was like, yeah, I agree with everything you guys are saying. But we got into it, and it was difficult. It was extremely difficult. And our daughter, she really like hated my guts for the first like 6-7 months. Didn't desire to be in my presence, and would like verbally, physically lash out. And that was a wild ride. And so I remember, and then obviously with our daughter, we got our son, and he was 8 months old at the time. Much easier to love a baby. I attached to our youngest son very easily, as did everyone else around us. And then I specifically remember probably 4 or 5 months into it, my business partner, I'd see him every day, and he specifically asked me, do you ever think you'll love your daughter like you love your son? And I was like, man, that's an interesting question. And I was like, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. But at that time, it became like apparent that, or like, so it was obviously obvious, like that's the vibe I was putting off around me. And so like, what's the vibe that she's getting? Mm-hmm. Fast forward, we keep doing this thing. We're a couple of years in at this point. And I've grown to love her. I love them equal. We're carrying on. We're decided, you know what, we should actually go through the application process and do this. But even within all of that time, there was still this huge divide between, I'm doing this for the kids, and their biological family I don't want any part of. So family visits, I hated it. Phone calls, couldn't stand it. All that stuff, like it made me, it drove me, I think very threatened, because I'm growing attached to these children. And when the biological family remains in the picture, there's always that piece of you is like, is this child going to stay or is they going home? Which I know is terrible thinking, but it's just like the reality of it. And then there was just like, there wasn't even this turning point. It was just like this slow, one day it just clicked. And I like said, like, how can we care about these children so much, but we can't care about their families, and that we'll love these children and do anything for them, but we won't love their families. And when that like clicked, which actually wasn't that long ago, I'd say like about a year ago, that's when like it all completely changed. And that's when, that paired with kind of actually realizing how messed up the system was and how overrun it all was at the same time, those two things sort of happened at the same time. And I realized like, there's really no better use of our time on this earth than to just fully commit to this life. And so that's how we like start to move into it, into, the capacity that we're now at. But everybody,
and I would say our involvement with
the birth families and the mothers and but with all that being said, people say like all the time to us, it's so good that you two were aligned on this from the start, and that you guys, or I'd love to do this, but my husband would never do it. And how did you get your husband to do it? And so I think that like maybe we've put off this this I don't know,
this idea, maybe this vibe.
Yeah, that we were like completely united, but that was not the case.
That was not your heart situation.
No, I don't even like kids. Like, I didn't like babysitting growing up, like hanging out with your younger nieces and nephews, all that stuff. Like, even I'm 20-some years old, I couldn't care about any of that. And like, even some people are like, oh, I can't wait to be a dad. That wasn't me. I was not that guy who was like,
that's why you and Nick are friends, because Nick didn't hold a baby until they handed him Nate.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
I think you touched on something that I mean, again, incorporating what's really interesting for me is what's the most incredible thing is how involved you are in the families and how you have really, I believe, gone the extra step, which is to, it's almost like you said, like we see this problem with the homelessness at the end, and then we see the kids and we can see the trajectory. And I feel like what you guys have really done is step back and be like, okay, we can pour all this time and effort into these kids. And then when mom is like, quote unquote, deemed ready, well, we send the kids back and the cycle just starts again. And you guys have really looked and gone, okay, it's almost like the opposite trajectory, which is like, how do we go to the parents and set them up so that when everyone's ready, there's success. And now success is a hard word, and I know it's hard to measure that, but it's actually one of the reasons we have our little guy. Is because Tanner and Maddy stayed so connected to this mom that when she needed help, they were there, and they tricked us into being friends with them. No, I'm kidding. We thank them on the regular now for our current life situation. But it was kind of like that support was there. And you guys have gone that far.
Had we not invested in mom after the kids went back to her, and had you and Nick not been willing to partner with us in that relationship, both her boys would have returned to care.
Yes.
And so that's significant that as a team, we were able to provide a way out for one of her children. And that's really beautiful.
Yeah.
This episode is sponsored by BW Beauty. If you want to brighten up your smile quickly and easily, then you have to try BW Beauty's at-home organic teeth whitening kit. You guys, I love this kit because it only takes 20 minutes per session, and you guys, I love a habit stack, and you can use a habit stack here. Put on your teeth whitening and then take that 20 minutes to read a book, listen to a podcast, unwind, watch a show, catch up on some messages. Your teeth will be whiter in no time. BW Beauty offers safe dental grade whitening in the comfort of your home with their kit. BW Beauty's whitening gel is the perfect balance of active ingredients. It has stain removing toughness with little to no sensitivity, and it is expertly crafted and formulated by dental professionals here in Canada. You guys, these products are a favorite among dentists, so you know you're using the best at home. The kit includes super detailed and easy to follow instructions to make the process a breeze. Each kit is going to give you a minimum of 12 at-home whitening sessions. That breaks down to a cost of $10 per session. Let's compare that to like a $600 whitening treatment in a dental office. Ordering from BW Beauty for their whitening kit is a no-brainer. And you guys, we have an exclusive discount code for you. Use the code HERSMILE at checkout to save 10% off of your kit online. This is such a great offer because you can order it no matter where you're listening from. You're going to want to head to bwbeautyxc.com to order your home organic teeth whitening kit, or follow them at bwbeautyxc on Instagram. And again, use code HERSMILE, HERSMILE, to save 10% off on your order.
I want to ask a little bit if you can share just what, I have a question written here, which is like, how do you as a married couple keep it together with all the chaos and trauma you're navigating? And I think like when we had Maddy on last time, obviously there was like dynamic there, but in the last few months or year, you've had, I think by my count, like you've at least had 6 other children in your care, at least. And there was a pretty significant experience, which I find to be, it's actually a very important role in mine and Nick's story too, of how we kind of came to where we are now. So I'm just wondering if you guys would be open to sharing that experience.
Yes, our sweet little baby that we got at the beginning of the year. I had touched on how we got a medical kiddo, and he had come from the hospital. He had spent his first year of life in the hospital for the majority, a few times returning home with his birth mother. And when they called us, he had been brought back to the hospital just because it didn't appear that all of his medical conditions were being properly cared for. But the hospital is constantly overrun with children in care, and they had called us it felt very abrupt, like, can you take him? Yeah. This is the situation. Does tomorrow work? And that is like I said, a very easy yes for me, and just making sure that, like, do we actually have our ducks in a row to do it? And we brought him home, and it was so much more, I think, challenging than we expected, but also like a change of pace in our life that we typically did not slow to. And it really forced us to be stuck at home because he had several attachments, and he was very vulnerable to being sick just because of the different conditions that he had. We spent a week actually in the hospital, and every parent and foster parent will do that differently, but it was very important to us that one of us was by his side every minute of the day. And so Tanner did a few shifts and got tired of the medical stuff that he didn't understand and always feeling like the odd one out in the room. So I then spent much of the week with him at the hospital. And
I think you spent like 3 or 4 full days, like didn't come home at night, like just like around the clock. Yeah.
Tanner would occasionally shift me off for an hour or two. But.
And the backstory, which we touched on in the first episode, is that you're a nurse.
Yes.
So this is why this was maybe more like you fit in a bit more with like the medical terminology and stuff going on.
Peds nursing and peds palliative is kind of how I ended my career. I haven't nursed for a couple of years now, but that was all very familiar. And so understanding what they're talking about, the procedures that they want to do, even just how policies work and stuff like that is very familiar to me. And I wanted to be there next to him while they made those decisions, and that we would be a part of making those decisions, because it was actually quite difficult because he had spent so much time in the hospital and only like maybe a month at that point in our home. The hospital staff has viewed him kind of as their son, and they know what's best. And I'm coming in with just a month of him in our home with a different perspective of what we believe is actually best now as his primary caregiver. And that was very challenging, I think, for both sides, because they're like, who are you? There. We have a year history with him. And I'm like, I know, I only have a couple of weeks, but this is really actually what we believe he needs to return home. And so it was very tense. And then we had returned home with him, and like I said, this very slow season of just like being home carried on constantly with his needs front of mind. And we didn't leave often because it required a lot of, like I said, equipment to go somewhere or do this. And because he was so vulnerable, it just didn't, I don't know. So it was very challenging. But when I look back on it, that's like the most beautiful part, is that as a family of what was, we were the core 5, and then he had come and just be the 6 of us. And we just kind of like settled in, and we were in our new home. And when I think on it, I just think it was such a beautiful time, because what we didn't know is that he ended up getting sick again. We got him on the same regime of medication as he was in the hospital, and he then shortly later passed away. And not ever anticipating that was going to be the end of that story was so, I think, devastating, because I had in my mind, like our other medical son we took home 2 years prior, that miraculously outgrew and overcame every single obstacle he was faced with, I very much believed, like, we're going to love this kid into healing, you know? Like, and that sounds so stupid. Amen. But like, no, like, let's get him out of the hospital. Let's get him in consistent embraces and consistent care, and let's just like see the healing that can be provided and to see the obstacles that can be overcome. And so it was just never on our radar that was going to be how that story ended.
How long did you have him?
Just over 6 weeks. Yeah.
Wow.
And so that was, yeah. And that was so challenging, but also like when we look back on it, I think we both can agree, like, so beautiful. And they're like, what we now know is that I think he should have been considered palliative. I think there was a lot that was overlooked on how serious some of his conditions were and what state of health he actually was at, that we didn't know. And I think even when social services called us, I don't think they knew. And so had we maybe been more informed, it would have changed our perspective on what life would have looked like for him, but we weren't, and that's okay. But the idea that he got to die like at home in Tanner's arms, actually, instead of in a hospital bed alone with 6,000 tubes, you know, shoved up in and around him, and a million people calling out different codes and instructions, is such like a cold, sad idea for me. And that happens so often. And instead, like, he was embraced and loved and held. And I think there's nothing more that we could offer these kids, even if that is the outcome. And so that is like such a treasure to us. And it's very special that for those 6 weeks, like, we got to be a part of changing his story, that we got to be a part of rewriting his ending, so that it wasn't alone in a bed, potentially, never knowing the same face and the same voice that I believe that he came to know over those 6 weeks. And although, yeah, it would like that makes it all okay for us. And we had a lot of people concerned about, we shouldn't take any more medical kids, and we need to do this for our kids and do this for our house, and we need to just stop taking kids in general, and this is very traumatic and this and that, which it is all of those things. But I think when you can reframe the picture and see it from this other perspective that isn't actually about our pain, but is about the victory and beauty in his life and how it ended, that changes everything. And that's the narrative that we told our kids, especially our bigger kids, that was very painful for, that they got to be a part of changing his story, and they got to be a part of loving this little guy that maybe had never felt some of those things before, or that had been so interrupted from feeling some of those things. And I think the hardest part is just that his own mama and grandma didn't get to be a part of that. It would be what we feel is the most painful part at this point, I think, when we look back on that. But it was so significant and very abrupt, but so beautiful. And I think too, that's what drives like my passion for hoping to take more kids out of the hospital that are in care and have medical needs, and hoping to even get people that aren't nurses to see that that's like very, very doable and possible and scary. But they are the least of the least. They are the most outcast because of this paper that says all of these things. But I think what we can offer them and their families that are unable to care for them in those seasons is just so worth it and so beautiful, despite the obstacles that may come. And And yeah, I don't know.
Tanner, I see you everyone in the room is emotional, but I'm wondering if you have anything that you want to share.
I cry all the time on the podcast. Like, it's not even a joke.
No, I don't know. Nothing specific. It was, had we known the outcome, I don't think it would have changed a single aspect of what we did. And I think it was very powerful for our children. And there's a lot of sweet memories there. And yeah, I feel very strongly that his story went from like basically total tragedy to something beautiful. And yeah, it is a lot to know that there are kids though who will experience life basically alone in a hospital, and I don't think that we realize that, and I think it's important to recognize that and to make an effort to disrupt that reality for them. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting is it's like you said, and y'all, we need a second.
It is a sad reality.
It's important that people see the rawness, though, of how this actually impacts lives.
Two thoughts come to mind for me. And the number one, I do not like when people, what is it? Like they put all the well, there was a reason for that, you're like, shut up. Shut up. But our perspective is that because we got to know, more specifically at that point, Maddy and I had developed friendship. And we had actually been with them before. Their little guy passed away the day before. Having dinner actually for the first time as couples and hanging out and just growing our friendship. I remember when you texted me and we ended up going to the funeral. And I don't know, I don't want to be like, I don't know if we would have gone, but you texted me and said, will you come? And I was like, yeah, of course we're going to go. So we went, and for us, this little guy's life impacted us in a way because we actually, a year before all of this, we were sitting on the beach with Maddy and Tanner, and we were kind of talking about foster care. And Nick and I said, it's not we don't feel called to that. And that's a whole different conversation, of course. So that's kind of in the back of our relationship here. But we're at this funeral, and we actually had the opportunity to hear Tanner really share some really beautiful things about this little guy's life and also about foster care. And it really caused us to get in the car and literally look at each other and go, what are we doing? Where's what are we doing? What are we doing with our life? This big, beautiful house, yard, all these kids, what are we doing to impact this? And so while I don't like when people are like, there's a reason, I can't help but look at how he impacted our life to being the beautiful chaos it is today. Right. And so that's the first thought. The second thought is I would agree with I think there's so many people who, and I think I had asked you guys once when we were hanging out, how are you guys doing? Because you kind of lost him, and right away it felt like had other kids coming in. But I would, maybe I'm going to speak for you here, but I feel like what I see with you guys is instead of letting it break you down, because, some people might be like, I can't love again. It's spurred you on to continue to let it light a fire, maybe instead
100%
to keep going. Because like you said, you took a story that was a bit was filled with tragedy and instead ended in love really. Mm-hmm. Right.
Well, I feel like this is the perfect place to really talk about, you know, how can people get involved? Right? Like, what are some things that you guys are currently doing and have in the works? And where can they find some resources? And what's some encouragement that we can give people to connect with you and to really get involved in all of this?
That's a good question, which often starts a lot of conversations between Tanner and I, because it's hard to answer specifically. But no, the death of him very much spurred us forward to remain invested, and that like we can't stop this. It's not about our pain, our loss. It's about what these children and their families need. Which is a month later we started doing the emergency placements, and then continued with some of the deeper relationships that we had been invested in with some of our kids' first families. And that is, well, you can interrupt me, like areas, like how can you be involved? Well, I think that you should sign up and be a foster parent. But a lot of people aren't going to do that. And I think a lot of people think that that's like the end of the road, but that's not. Like, you also, I've said this many times, you should get to know a foster parent and you should support them, because 70% of foster parents in the very first year actually end up quitting. And so there's like all these people that are gung-ho and then they fall flat. And I think a lot of that, if Tanner and I maybe weren't the personalities we are, that would have been us, because it was completely very lonely that first year. Very difficult. We had no supports. We knew no other foster families. And there was no one stepping into our life saying like, you guys just started this crazy thing and like, how can we help you? It was the exact opposite of, you guys have started this crazy thing and you should probably stop.
Yeah.
And we need to stop that. We need to stop that narrative. We need to partner with these families that are stepping into this crazy world, because it is crazy, as you know now, and they need help. They need support. They need friendship. They need people to come into their home and not judge their parenting styles or how their kids might be acting that day, or the parents that aren't able to care for these kids in care anymore. You just need to walk in and befriend them and love them and support them, which is very much, I think, what you pursued with me. And all unbeknownst to me at the time, I was like, this is very uncomfortable, has become like the most beautiful relationship.
Mm-hmm. I literally, the first time she came over, I was like, I just need you to know that God told me to love you. And she was like, I'm never coming here again. And I was like, nope. We're friends now, and now we're very good friends.
Like I said that, like, I'm not very good at friendships, and you're like, that's okay, I don't give up. Something like
which we now have some stories that I think have proven that.
It's true. But so that's always a big one for me, and I feel like that's easy to just like, yes, love on a mother or father that's stepped into the world of foster care. And support them, and like, what are their needs? Like, and maybe their kids have tons of visits and they need a driver to take them to their visit, or a babysitter while they take them to their visit, or maybe they just need you to stop by with a coffee and drop it off and leave it on the doorstep and leave, so that they know, like, I see you, I get what you're doing, and I'm not going to take any of your time, but I want you to know that, you know. Or maybe they need you to arrange a babysitter for them and force them to get out of the house. Like, finding respite is incredibly difficult. Respite is just a fancy way of saying babysitter for foster kids.
You're like, let's break it down here to the simplest form.
Yeah. And so, like, those are based on our needs and based on other foster families that we've gotten to know. I just see that as like a significant need. And then, like Tanner talked about with kinship care, like extended birth families that are looking after their nieces, nephews, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, whatever, they need support. And I think because they're like out of the foster care world, we kind of think like, oh, you're looking after your own family, all good. But like Tanner shared, like, not all good. And a lot, like, we don't have to be naive to this. Most of the kids in care are coming from reserves, are coming from Indigenous communities, and so their kinship are Indigenous individuals that have come from the same tragedy, the same difficulty, the same obstacles, and they're still going through those obstacles while also trying to maintain and sustain their family. And there is nothing more admirable, and we need to love on these individuals and these cookums and mushums and aunties and uncles that are stepping in place for their siblings or their kids or whatever, amidst the obstacles that they are facing that like we will never ever have to face on our end. Yeah. And so that to us is really, really important. And we actually are close with an organization in Saskatoon called Hands at Work. And that's one of the huge areas that they're invested in, is just putting these people around these kinship families and supporting them and helping maintain and sustain those family units that have been formed, so that we can prevent children from being removed and entering the system, even at that kinship level, because that does still happen.
It's a lifeline, yeah?
Yeah. Yes.
And all you need is one lifeline.
Yes. And I believe that so strongly, because we've experienced that with some of the family connections that we have pursued. We have gotten those calls when we're like, why would they call us? But it's because even these mothers and fathers as adults have no one. They have no one to call in this crisis. And then all of a sudden they're like, well, maybe Maddy and Tanner can help us in this situation. And then we get to step in and show real practical love to back the words that we've offered over, however long that relationship. And then how the floodgates just open after that. They see you as for real. They see you as...
Erica knows.
Like,
she knows what that's like.
One time, you're like, all right. Which is great. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Do you want to touch on the project, or do you want to wait?
Yeah, sure. We can touch on it.
So
this would tie into like practical ways so one thing we've encountered is circumstances where there is a mother, a sister, an auntie, someone who needs help. They might need a place because they don't know where to go. They might be trying to get out of circumstance for betterment of them and their kids, whatever it may be. And that led us to deciding we needed a home that was available. And so that is sort of a project we've started. It's very disorganized and doesn't make sense right now, but we have a house that for the first few months housed a mother of one of our children, and she stayed there. And the whole goal was just to help her get back on her feet and help her in the difficulties and the challenges. And
to provide a place of sobriety that she could confidently
away from all of like the ease of temptation or the ease of getting pulled into something. And then now recently we have another mother who will be using that space with a couple children that she's caring for, kinship care. And it's serving its purpose in regards to, sometimes like getting from a difficult situation to a good situation, the step is just too large, whether that's getting into treatment or getting an apartment or whatever that may be. And so we're just trying to like sort of bridge that gap to some degree, where we might not be like this house might not be like a permanent solution, but it's a place of safety. It's immediate. And now let's work together and, see where we're going to go from there. So we're not exactly sure what this is like going to morph into.
It's just a baby dream.
It's like in infancy right now. And I feel like I've had the opportunity to hear a lot about it. So I want to give my little 2 cents on the project, which is really, to be very clear, it's a physical house. It's a real home. Like Tanner has mentioned, that's like almost like a stepping stone. Mm-hmm. I think the goal that's really around this project is to provide, like you said, a safe space, community, very like what we've already talked about, bringing community around these individuals, because it doesn't do good to just pop someone in a house in isolation. We know that people are meant to be together.
And that's what we were experiencing with the moms that we were in relationship with in Saskatoon. You said yes, but I have asked so many other women to partner with me in loving on this one specific mom, and the drive to Saskatoon was the barrier. Too far removed from me. Yeah. But to bring them into our community right next to our church, our group of friends, our aunties and uncles and stuff like that to surround them. Yeah, I would say almost more important than the physical space is the relationships.
Yes.
That will love on them.
But I'm going to be bold and I'm going to be pushy a little bit here on behalf of this project is, if you want to be involved and you've like heard their story and you're like, oh my gosh, you're feeling like we are right now. And you're like, how do I be involved? There's emotional ways to be involved. You can be connected. First of all, message Maddy and Tanner. It's Maddy's Instagram, but you'll see a bit of Tanner on there too. And CJ and I are working on them to kind of like change it a little bit here. But send a DM and say, I heard you on this podcast. I heard you have a project going on. How can I be involved? And it might be as simple as like, do you want to come and meet this person and have coffee and become a member of this mother's community right now? But straight up, there's financial support too. This project, we are hoping, I say we, the project is hoping that, there will be donations that will help with rent, groceries, with really keeping the upkeep of this house. It is in the infancy stage, but that doesn't mean that it's actually the perfect time. This is where I get all sazy. This is the perfect time for you to get involved then and come in and really collaborate and work together as like a unit on this project, which is very near and dear. I feel like everyone around the table here is sitting here being like, this is a great opportunity to get involved. Sorry.
It is very risky. Salesy. Like, we're not an organization. We don't have an official title, this and that. So I understand that's been a big obstacle for many people, but it is something that several people that we've shared kind of our dream with have been so on board with it and are dreaming with us. And that's huge. And so, yeah, if this is something that you're passionate about.
Well, and I think when you put out a need, right, you see people step forward, right? So I'm like, there's like furniture, groceries, gift cards, you know what I mean? I'm like, there's so many ways that you can step forward and be able to help, right? And so I think if this is something that's, calling on your heart, like you should absolutely reach out. And I would agree with Erica that the infancy stage is the perfect time to help, because when an organization is more set up, not to say that they don't still need, they don't still need the funds, but like this is when it's harder. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think
you will make a difference.
Yeah. And I think the real thing for this is seeing a need and meeting the need right now and not waiting, because I want to be open about the pushback about you should be an organization and you should get this, and it's really like, that's great and that's a good goal to have, but the need is today.
Right. Yeah.
So emergency placement, the needs today.
Yeah.
So how do we step in today and do what we need to do? So
Maddy, how will we follow you and a little bit of Tanner? Where do we find you?
You guys,
what's your phone number? How do we text you?
If you like following Nick and I, you will really enjoy following them, because Tanner actually talks. Nick doesn't talk.
Tanner says outrageous, inappropriate things.
I liked the adjusting of the boxers the other day on
camera.
I
thought that was going to get cut out, okay? I don't know why it was added in.
It takes too much effort for me to have to edit a clip after I've taken it.
Okay, how do we find you? My
Instagram is Mama Maddy, still the same.
Spell it.
MOMMA MADDY. And yes, definitely do message me. I will. Disclaimer, it might take me a couple days to get back to you. Not a strength of mine, but I will get back to you.
Understandable with 9 children.
It's only 8 right now.
8 and
only 8.
1 on the way.
And 1 on the way.
By the time this podcast airs, our bathroom will be done and I will have had a baby.
Okay, we're putting it out there.
In the bathroom.
In the bathroom.
That's why it had to be done.
That could be a whole episode. We'll have you back to talk about home birth.
Oh, yeah.
Here's the deal.
Let's go.
Fired up.
Let's go.
I mean, thank you guys. Like, this is obviously so near and dear that you guys got to come. And Tanner, I'm so happy you were able to come. And again, what beautiful timing that we basically texted you 8 hours ago. We're like, so what are the chances you can get a babysitter and show up here and podcast? And it was like, yeah, we're in.
Done.
So, please go and follow along their beautiful journey on Instagram. Message them on how to get involved in not even just their project, but other projects around the city. And thank you guys so much for being here. We love you guys a lot.
Thank you.
We liked it.
It was good.
Thank you everyone for joining us on this episode of the Her Podcast. If you want to follow along with us, you can find us on Instagram and TikTok at its.her.podcast. We can't wait to see you there.